How y'all doing? For this review, I'm going to go over a book which I was aware of when this book came out back in the mid 2000s, but I didn't pick it up then, and I picked it up at the used bookstore a few months ago. And that is The Fair Folk by Mervin Kaye. Now, I first saw this book when it came out through Science Fiction Book Club, before you had Amazon or anything. You had limited options how you could get books that you want when they came out. And one of the things back then, and this is still around, the website's still there, but I looked at it, it didn't have much in the way of science fiction. Of course, that's not really their fault, it's what's being produced out there. But I'm digressing a bit. So, one of the things before internet made it so widely, easily available to get any book you want, is you had book clubs, which are, mail would come in and you would take a look at their catalog. They would have a choice selection, which if you didn't say no to, they would give you automatically, or you could choose from the selection they had. And this was at the time they were making their own, publishing their own books. So Fair Folk by Mervin Kaye features 6 stories here. And while I didn't pick it up at the time it came out, despite the fact that it drew my interest, I picked it up this time because I looked at it and one of the stories is from Tanith Lee, who I just finished reading her 5-book series of the Tales of the Flat Earth, and I enjoyed those, so I figured, okay, I'll read this one. I'm sure the others are good. Let's take a look. The first story is the Tanith Lee story I was talking about, and as Uos, that's U-O-U-S. And I won't explain what that means, because that kind of gives away the little twist at the end about what that means. So it was done by Tanith Lee. It was the original story for this anthology, and it involves stop me if you've heard this one before. This young girl whose mother died when she was young, her father remarried, he dies, her stepmother inherits everything. So her stepmother and her stepsisters are, they get they all go to this one little dilapidated house in the middle of the countryside. This takes place in England, mind you. So they live in this dilapidated house that seems to, every time they try to fix it up, that house kind of says screw it and something else goes wrong. And even besides all that, the stepmother and the daughters, they go out in a car, they go out into town all the time. They would either do their shopping, they go out drinking. The stepmother has a live-in boyfriend. She also hires a tutor for her daughters and stuff like that. While the young girl, who's the stepdaughter of this, she is the one who lives in, doesn't have very good clothing. She has to do all the chores and whatever cooking they ask for her to do. While they're going out in the car and having fun in town or what have you, she has to run errands, which means she has to go through to the backyard, through the forest, to the bus stop, go into town, and do all the shopping and do and whatever errands they want. And she's got the bandit at a stick in this whole thing. And as she was coming home during one of her errands, she recalls how girls in her situation would have some sort of fairy godmother, or how elves would somehow give her wishes. And so she just yells out in the forest, 3 wishes. And you see where this is going, right? And eventually she'd come across an elven prince. And of course, 3 wishes are going to be granted to the elf prince from her. That's right. Apparently, there was this old, it had to be this agreement from way back when, where humans would go to elves and ask for 3 wishes, but humans also have to grant wishes to the elves on occasion. Now it's her turn to honor that contract. So, will this be to her advantage or disadvantage? Well, let's read. We have to read the story to find out. The next story is Grace Notes by Megan Lindholm. Now, this is an interesting one. This involves a man who, lives a single life in an apartment there. He's trying to make meat for him. He's not wealthy and all. He had a pretty good job working at Boeing, but, despite all his training there, Boeing went away, so now he has to work another job that doesn't pay as well. So it's just a day-by-day thing for him living a bachelor life. But slowly, little by little, he started realizing that parts of his home are being, cleaned up. He's coming home with no laundry, around. His bed is made, and he's finding magazines he knows he didn't get, and there was stuff that he doesn't, like Martha Stewart's Living, or, and Good Housekeeping and things like that. He's finding food prepared, little by little. It's just more and more. Now, in the process, that's the only person he was able to tell is his neighbor, who's a woman who was a waitress, but she's also been educated in folklore and all that. He tries telling her about this, and she says, "Sounds like I got a brownie." It's like, What? Well, it's a fairy that does household chores and stuff like that. Now, he can't talk to it because brownies don't like to be seen and everything. But at first, it was going fine. He goes with it and all that. Yeah, he's getting good soaps. His place is looking great, and unfortunately, it gets worse because it's all coming out of his pocket. The more the brownie starts making more and more of his home is better, it's all coming out of his pocket and out of his budget. So he tries to give it away, but ends up offending it. How do you get rid of something that you can't see, it doesn't talk to you and everything, and you take it off and all hell breaks loose because of that? Well, you get see what happens when you ever read the story. The next story is The Gypsies in the Woods by Kim Newman. Now, this involves this takes place in sort of Victoria era London. Now, it starts off with a man, from a particular government agency called the Diogenes Club. He starts investigating a case of a couple of children that went missing in the woods. Both were young, not too far differences in age, and they were just walking down a small bit of woods and disappear entirely. They spent days searching for these kids. Well, they did eventually find them, except that the boy stopped being a boy. He was found an older man. And they checked him out. They, looked at his story, and he said, he says things that the boy would know, and there was certain physical evidence. For instance, the fact that he grows, he still has his young teeth and all that. But the mother of the children won't accept him. But also, not too far after that, they find a young girl, still a young girl, in which everyone celebrated because at least the daughter was found, and not everyone accepts at least the mother of the two children doesn't accept the boy. So they were happy about that, but there was something odd about the little girl. And eventually the story jumps a little bit ahead in time, and we get to see what further happens between that. The investigator, the main character is an investigator from the Diogenes Club, but while he's also has an assistant who is she's a reporter. And apparently this is a series of stories by Kim Newman involving this character. I haven't read his stuff before, but after reading this, it will be interesting to read other stories of this kind. So that's the Gypsies in Wood by Kim Newman. The next story is The Kelpie by Patricia A. McKillop. I'm going to read a small section about this. In the beginning of each story, there's a small synopsis of the accomplishments of the writer, what all they've done, and this one gives an explanation of the origins of the story. Okay. The origins of the following story trace back to early 2003, Ms. McKillop explains. I was asked to write a novella for a collection of fantasy stories. The only stipulation was that there would be some sort of romance in the tale. I chose to write about a sort of pseudo-Victorian world in a city much like London, with characters who were very like the pre-Raphaelite painters and their circle. I decided to return to a similar milieu for the Kelpie. And she does so with a great eclat. Her delicious prose reminds me of Oscar Wilde, and I don't believe the comparison hyperbolic. Okay, so basically this little artist commune here where you have sort of this one beautiful woman here is just now showed up. She wants to do her own paintings. She's talked to some of the other female painters that she can pose with them while doing her own work. And she's even found this young man who they fall instantly in love. Thing is, she also attracted the attention of somewhat of a villain of this. I say somewhat because he's not, he's kind of the driver of the events that will lead to the Kelpie, and the story says. This arrogant creep here is obsessed with her, and he makes a deal to where he will give the women of this artist commune their own gallery, which they don't have, had very little chance of getting on their own. He makes some arrangements to have a gallery for them in exchange for her to pose for his painting of Boudica, because he finds her very beautiful and perfect for this. So she's quite uneasy with this guy, and the conversations they have is it's kind of creepy for anyone. And events go about to where she just runs off with the person she falls in love with to a nice getaway home, and again, this guy's a creep. He follows them uninvited, and then eventually she ends up going to this lake where she sees this horse that can walk on water. Now it's also known to Kelpie. That leads to, if I go any further, it'll start spoiling for everyone. So I'll leave it at that. The next one is a very funny story here. It is An Embarrassment of Elves by Craig Shaw Gardner. This is one of his stories from, apparently he has a series of books. I've seen these books on the shelves, but I never read them before. You have, stories about Ebenezer, who's one of the greatest wizards of the world. And this one is a 1 to 4. That's where the main protagonist of the story is. That's Ebenezer's apprentice. Now, this one attacks all tropes of fantasy here. You got Wundvar, who's a apprentice wizard here. He's got his companions. This dragon, who is also an actor, who is disappointed in the fact that his act involved a beautiful young woman who left. They used to perform an act together, but she left, the dragon for a giant. An assassin that likes to choke things. There's a little sprite that is obsessed by shoes. All these interesting former companions with him. A unicorn that talks with him and stuff like that. They were traveling to the city where, I guess there were previous problems from another story, and then all of a sudden this beautiful elf woman shows up and invites them all to a party, and they can't resist. And she would tell them all their very long, complicated name that none of them could say, and she gives them a little song. Basically gives a shorter version of where if you start, and all the elves do this. They tell them this long story that everyone's impressed with, but they give them a shortened version, and it's all derived from doo-wop music. It's that type of comedy. This is the type of stories that rank up there with Terry Pratchett's Discworld or the Myth Adventure series, things like that. So this is so basically, right before the elves started coming along, they started noticing this dark rider just looking ominously. He says, "What's this mean?" He says, "Oh, there's just dark riders. They just show up there and they just basically announce that doom is coming. That's it." Yeah, pretty much. It's the announcement of the villains about showing up here. They capture him and interrogate him for a while, and even allow him to join him for a bit as a change of pace, which he likes. But eventually, the elves invite them to this wonderful party here, and things are not going to get very interesting when the coming evil that Doom Riders represent come in unannounced. So I won't spoil it too much there, but it's a very funny story. I enjoyed it very much. The last story of this is Except the Queen by Jane Yolen and Midori Snyder. It's a story of two elven sisters who were exiled into our world by the queen for some small little thing. They say it was a small thing, but but the queen exiled to our world just the same. So they're trying to live it out in their own separate living spaces. The whole story is told from one sister writing a letter to the other, not through emails or anything, just handwritten, and slap it. They give it to an animal to transport them. They have various means of transporting and everything like this. But apparently, they come across these two kids. One discovered by the other. And one sister finds one, the other sister finds the other, a boy and a girl. And apparently, there's something about these two that has attracted the attention of a red cap, and they later find out as they explore through all the omens, the spells, and what these kids tell about each other, that something big between them two is about to happen. So the two sisters are doing what they can to solve what's going on here and stop the red cap from doing whatever he plans to do with them, and they're trying to find out what the queen has to do with all this. I won't explain any more than that because that will spoil it, of course. So yeah, there's that story. So what did I think about this? I enjoyed it very much, especially the Tanith Lee story and the and a couple of the others there. I mean, all of them are very good, and if you're familiar with fairy tales, especially of myths and legends, you get a lot of these. And you end up liking the modern takes of all this. But if you're not familiar with fairies and different kinds of, that's okay. The Afterword does have a section there where it goes over to different types of fairies. Or brief descriptions of ones you would find in this book: banshees, brownies, dryads, elves, kobolds, things like that. And you can see, that way you're kind of caught up enough to, get into the stories or know a little bit more about fairies than what you normally would have outside of, badly derived modern tales that just says, Tinkerbell and everything like that. So I think if you have a chance to find this book in any of your bookstores, I think it's well worth the read. Some good authors, some good stories there, and some of the stories are connected to the authors other works, in continuous series, like Craig Shaw Gardner, who's already written several books of his comedic fantasy series involving a story in this book. Let's see, the one about the investigator. No, let's see, To Gypsies in the Woods by Kim Newman. He's written other stories of that. But others are just single, standalone stories there, and I think it's well worth a read. So, this is at the tail, roughly around the last era of science fiction book club, producing some good stuff here, from other writers, of course, but, they're at the time producing, reprinting classics or coming out with anthologies like this, and I think it's great. Give it a shot. If you like fairy tales, modern day fairy tales from some new writers, check this out. Fair Folk, edited by Mervin Kaye. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.